open that page, I'll search for my fix, find what I need in the deep dark abyss.
Welcome to AI Skeptics. This week's podcast features our good friend Andy Smart.
Hello.
And Sherry is my co-host today.
We're back.
We're very excited. Yeah, we're psyched to be here in San Francisco. And you know, we don't want to get Andy fired, so we're going to talk about his books and his paper. The first book we're going to talk about, which I really loved, was about how to not do too much. Tell us about it.
So I wrote that book in 2012, I think, 2013. And it was right when I had moved from working in the academic lab to a big aerospace company. And I had to do all this like time management training.
Oof.
And I had just come out of a neuroscience lab. So I was like steeped in neuroscience and brains. And the big fad back then in neuroscience was the default mode network.
Oh, yeah. Wait.
Familiar about?
Wait, isn't that what like gets suppressed when you're doing like mushrooms?
Well, that's a good question.
Not to get us on a total segue.
We could talk about the neuroscience of psychedelics.
That's coming back up though.
Yeah, it might come back up.
Yeah.
So I just had, I was taking all this time management stuff like, 7 Habits of Effective People and these, there's a whole genre of, and now it's more about like optimization and like, what do they call it? Like, maxing. Everything's date maxing, looks maxing.
How like
10x your whatever.
Wait, this is like people who like use spreadsheets to figure out their life.
Yeah. Like you're interested in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go. And so I was just like, I just hated it so much. All this stuff.
That's not you at all.
And so, I had this idea. I was like, it was sort of like a shower thought. Like,
this is a man who like, I had to go find where he stores extra toilet paper in his garage just now. And he was like, it's above the bin. And like, there was like 45,000 bins in your basement. I found it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, this is not a man who like wants to spend time optimizing time management.
No, not at all.
You just want work.
Yeah. No, so I had this idea, wouldn't it be funny, just given all this time management stuff, it'd be funny to write an anti-time management book.
Mm.
And then, I thought, actually, there might be a serious, like, scientific case to make that all this, time management and optimization of your life is really counterproductive, especially if you want to be creative and innovative, which requires a lot of like downtime and just spacing out and not doing anything. And so, I kind of combined different sort of case studies from history, about, it's kind of cliche stuff, but like Newton, relaxing in his garden and being hit by the apple. And then,
is that a real story?
I mean, it's hard to know exactly how much is apocryphal and how much is like, but he does there's a lot of, documentation about how he actually wrote to friends, like, as I was relaxing in my garden, the notion of gravitation appeared in my mind.
Right.
And so I really like lean into that. And I like try to tell this neuroscience story about what might have been going on in his brain. And because he had no external pressure, no schedule, no, you know what I mean? He was just like kind of spacing out in his garden. And then he's like,
okay. So like two things occur to me and I'm going to hog Andy unless you interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Honestly, I love reading these books, and I also love Andy.
You're one of the few people who.
I did not even know he wrote this time optimization.
Oh no, I've read all his books, and I fucking.
There's only 2.
Yeah, but there should be more. We'll talk about that too. But the first thing I want to mention is that as a mother of 3 boys, and you're a father of 2 boys.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to say to them as they were growing up was when they complained about being bored, was like, oh, good, I'm glad you're bored.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're very, I don't know, not prescient, but I mean, that's the wise, that's exactly.
I remember being bored as a kid. Yeah. And that was like definitely the most productive moment.
And this, on theme of the work is like, that's kind of what we're taking away from the children with the phones and the devices and the
scheduling.
And the schedule. So it's like the scheduling, the
play, and then you got blah, 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 and then you got blah, blah, blah.
And if you have any downtime, what do they do? Just pull out the phone and like,
right.
And it's destroying this, the boredom that is required, I think, to develop like just have novel thoughts and integrate all your experiences and stuff. And what I think, the schedules and the pressure and the phones are like,
Didn't David Graeber write a book about bullshit jobs?
Yeah, he did. I knew him. You knew him too.
I did know him from Occupy.
Yeah.
But tell me how it relates to that book.
Well, his argument in that book is like, capitalism is supposed to be the most efficient, optimal or optimizing allocator of resources.
Right.
Like the market, like, the
market is wise.
Yeah. In contrast to a central planned economy, Hayek had this idea that the market is the most efficient processor of information and prices are the blah, blah. And so he was kind of like, isn't it curious that there were some anecdotes he told, and then he did some surveys in the UK, and it was like 35% or 40% of the people in the UK were like, yeah, my job is 100% meaningless. If I didn't do it, like literally nothing bad would happen. And he's like, isn't it curious that capitalism, despite this myth we sort of have about it as this like efficient allocator and things, and like everyone's allocated correctly according to market forces, that you have millions of people who work at what he called bullshit jobs. And he came up with like a taxonomy of bullshit jobs. Like there's like the flunky, I can't remember all the categories.
I love that idea.
Yeah. And,
I didn't read that book, by the way. I only read your book.
Okay.
Just FYI.
David Graeber is a big inspiration, to thinking, because he didn't take anything for granted and was just like,
he works from basic principles.
Yeah. And he was like, why do we live this way? Like, we don't have, we made all this weird shit up, and we can make different shit up if we want,
right.
And like, I thought that was like, yeah.
Well, not to be like the tech bro person about it, but to be the tech bro person about it. But, and so what though? Like, so what if we're not being creative, and we're spending all our time at internet, and all our time is regulated, and we don't have downtime where we can do that? Is there a benefit? Like, is there studies on how that's actually beneficial overall for society? Because I just saw on a tech event happening in town where they're having a discussion about how perhaps like just kind of, it's like, like darker kind of stuff, like the way that politics or the economy kind of works out, and how creativity works out. We just had like a few tech people say some things in media. What's his name? Anderson Horowitz, right? He was just what was that quote from him the other week that was making rounds?
That he doesn't reflect.
Yes, he doesn't have an introspection.
He doesn't even believe in introspection as an idea.
So like the normal reaction is like, gasp, that's not normal. Like you're supposed to have introspection. You're supposed to have this downtime and creativity. However, I just saw a talk in a gathering around how maybe he's right. Is it actually any good? Do we need introspection? I was like, it didn't even occur to me to think that way. So based on that, like, do we actually need that sort of like creativity and downtime?
I mean, I think it's, he's got like, of course it benefits him if people aren't questioning the situation and just like making him a lot of money from there. So I think from the like benefits whom or who is an important question. And like, I agree if it's like,
like sorry.
No, go ahead.
You, but I just can't agree more with that statement. Like my entire life is based on this question of like, for whom does this fail? Yeah. Whether this is an algorithm or a system.
Yeah.
It works great for Peter Thiel to say, don't go to college.
Yeah.
Just work for me at Palantir right directly out of high school.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have any liberal arts critical thinking education, right?
And but
it doesn't work that well for people who are just doing whatever.
I think there's 100% an ideological motivation behind not wanting people to introspect, not wanting people to go to do humanities. Because that stuff makes you go like, wait a second. What is all this bullshit we're
like
that's how social movements start, I think. So it's insidious, I think. Yeah, but and it's true. I think there's a big debate around the more we're automating and like maybe will work even be necessary in the future? How will people find meaning? And I feel like we avoid that real deep reflection by filling up our lives with all this activity. You never have to sit back and think like, what, or, I feel like you're kind of kicking the can of that question of like, what's the purpose of your own life?
Well, I'm going to go one step further.
Okay.
Like one meta step further, which is like that, the optimization of your life, becomes the purpose.
Yeah.
That instead of having this kind of like bored, like, what am I doing with myself? Who am I? What is it? What happens after I die? Kinds of existential questions. You're just like, how do I optimize myself?
Yeah.
How do I optimize my time so I don't waste any time talking to my mother,
right,
or talking to my brother? It's like, how do I optimize my time for towards whatever goal that becomes the meaning?
Right, but that becomes the goal. It's like that becomes the end.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same sort of mistake that people make about money, where you're like, money is supposed to be like like I want money to feed my kids and send them to school and have a place to live. But then, especially in Silicon Valley, money becomes the end in itself. And like you said, I agree, the optimization becomes. I just read a great book by Ben Recht, who is Deb Raji's advisor at Berkeley. And he wrote, it's a book called The Irrational Decision.
We just all agree that we're huge fans of Deb.
Yeah,
Deb Raji fan club.
100%.
But he talks about the history of optimization in the post-World War II military. Can you figure out the best diet for the least expensive diet that will deliver just enough nutrients to the people? But of course, it's like a horrible diet that no one would ever eat because it's like disgusting. But you can line up the optimization line through like cost and nutrition.
Sure.
And then that just becomes applied to literally every aspect of our life, And so he was saying like, there's certain cases where optimization and machine learning are good and work and like, but it shouldn't be applied to literally everything.
We shouldn't all be like, let's soil and green this motherfucker right here. Let's do this.
So even if there's not any good benefits, in which there are good benefits, then it's still something that we should be doing because you shouldn't be too weird.
Kind of, I mean, yeah. Exactly. You shouldn't be too weird.
Don't be too weird.
That's basically
that's the takeaway. Don't be too weird. Okay, let's move on to your second book.
All right.
It's definitely too weird.
It's too weird.
I love it for that. Because by the way, my personal motto is be a little bit too weird.
Yeah.
And can you tell us, I mean, the way I remember it, and it's been a few years since I read your book, but it was like, what if a computer or an AI takes acid?
Yeah. So it's fun. It's really funny because that book too, I wrote in 2015.
By the way, like it's a fucking tragedy that you have not written another book since that.
I know. I had another book going.
No shit. You had another book going.
Yeah.
I'm like, I still want to see that book. I want to read that book, but okay.
But no, this one too I was working at Novartis, which is a big pharma company. And it's based in Switzerland, and it used to be called Sandoz, like Sando.
Yeah.
And in 1943, that's where Albert Hofmann worked, and he was the chemist who synthesized LSD for the first time. And
Hoffman.
Albert Hofmann.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, different Hoffman.
Different kind of.
Both were probably enthusiastic about LSD.
Yeah.
But so they had this weird archive there at where on the 6th floor of this building that was like kind of off to the side, and I thought it was, like no one ever went in there. There was like a weird old archivist there. Anyway, I found like there was all his old lab notes and stuff, kept there. And at the same time, I had studied philosophy and cognitive science, etc., and had worked in brain stuff, and like I was, I always been interested in philosophy of mind. And right around that time was when I think DeepMind had done AlphaGo like AI deep learning, like the deep learning revolution had sort of started in 2012.
Like, right, exactly.
And and I had always been sort of interested in machine consciousness as a topic in philosophy and just consciousness in general and philosophy of mind and blah, blah. And so anyway, I was at this place where LSD was literally first synthesized and eaten and tried, which is I don't know if you know that famous story.
No.
Where so Albert Hoffman was actually working on like respiratory drugs, and he was working with this ergot fungus, and he was like synthesizing different, he was changing molecules and stuff in the lab. And this one, it was called LSD-25. It was like the 25th version of this derivative of a thing. And he either got some in his eye or in his hand.
Fingers or
something. And then he started to like see colors and feel really strange and like.
Well, what happened to the other
bike
25?
ride?
Did he?
Well, those were, I don't know what those were.
He just like, I stuck them all over my penis and nothing happened.
Well, no, so after
all I needed was just like a molecule in my eye.
No one hears about LSD 24.
That one just puts you in a bad mood for like a week. No, but he had this experience, and then so he came back to the lab and he's like, what? He thought maybe it was like chloroform, because chloroform is what you use as a solvent. And he's like, oh, maybe I just got chloroform. But then he's like, maybe it was this stuff.
Right.
And so he made more, and he made what he thought was a very small dose.
Heroic dose.
He's like, I'm just going to try this, like, it was like 250 micrograms.
I'm just going to stick it right in my eye.
Well, and he's like, this probably isn't even going to do anything. And he made some, and then he put it in water and drank it just to be like, I want to see what this.
Oh my God.
And then he because it was actually that was like a massive dose of LSD. And
what would it be in today's terms? Like how many doses?
It'd be 250.
But yeah, like.
Doses.
I don't know either, but.
I'm going to say it's about 100 hits.
Hits or something.
I'm going to guess. Like,
wow. That guy was fucking high.
Yeah. So he was like, oh my God, fuck, I killed myself. I'm going to die. He was seeing devils. And then he asked his lab assistant to like, I got to get home. I took some stuff. I'm fucked. And he just wanted to drink a bunch of milk. And then he tried to ride his bike home. So that's why
it's the bike ride.
That means it wasn't as high as I was.
Well,
when I did.
He's like, I got on my bike and I had no sensation of moving, but suddenly I was at my house.
Oh shit.
So, and then he sat for all these hours in the trip, and then, he drank a bunch of milk and etc. And then he came back and he was telling everyone like, oh my God, I don't know what this stuff is. But
he came out okay.
Yeah. And then he really thought, and then he had this sort of epiphany breakthrough moment when he's like, oh my God, I understand everything. And anyway, long story short, he gave it to he was like, tried this stuff and nobody believed him. But then everyone soon realized like, this is a legit thing. And he really was a proponent of using it in psychotherapy. And like, it was super effective, treating alcoholism, treating addiction. And they have
and depression.
It's right. Like thousands of studies, but then, and this Albert Hoffman got really pissed at Timothy Leary.
Yeah, because he was a dick.
And he goes like, the LSD is not a party drug. It's not supposed to be a party drug. And he's like, the hippies got a hold of it. Then FDA, and actually one of the reasons we have randomized controlled trials now mandated was because they wanted to disallow all the trials on LSD from being they wanted to get, because it had become such a cultural thing in the United States that they're like, we can't allow all this evidence that LSD is actually, there's no risk of addiction. You'd have, and the toxicity to effective dose is the ratio is very high. So like,
yeah, you can't really overdose.
You can't really, like there was one thing I read where they injected a huge needle of it into an elephant's heart. And it died. So that's like that. Basically, you have to like inject a syringe of LSD into your heart. You might die.
Right. So
anyway,
to your book.
To the book. So, that the machine consciousness stuff in philosophy and neuroscience had been going on also since, I would say, the post-war cybernetics movement. And Hillary Putnam even was talking about like, well, you can't talk about theory of mind without, or, thinking about machine being conscious. It opens up all these questions about like, are our minds just our brains? Is it the same? And is there there was this huge push to get rid of dualism. Like everyone was like, there's clearly no soul. Like we got to get rid of Descartes and the soul. So there's clearly just physics. but how do we then explain, like, then the big mystery was like, why do we experience stuff? Like, how can the physics of the brain, that's still the mystery. Yeah.
I mean, by the way, like, if you don't mind, I'm just going to like connect back to the first topic because, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been talking to my family, my mom in particular, my mom, who I actually interviewed last week for our podcast here
about the email,
about the origin of the internet. Yeah. But she's like very fixated on the idea that her mind is a computer and a computer is like a mind.
Oh,
like that metaphor is so fixated in her brain. And it occurs to me that that's a non-useful metaphor that people are completely addicted to.
Yeah.
It's like they cannot get past that.
No.
And it means that this idea of machine consciousness clicks for them.
Yeah.
Like they don't question it.
Well,
just to finish, like the connection to the first thing is like they think that they can optimize their thinking, their existence by treating themselves like a machine.
Yeah.
There's just one step past like my brain is a computer to being like my body's a machine and I'm going to like minimize sleep or I'm going to like maximize thinking or like, they're doing something to themselves because of this narrow and fixated metaphor.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was just like that's a connection I had to like
and to underline that point, I think that's like the crux of the issue of like the communication crisis, I'm calling it, in like AI governance and policy space. Because people are talking over each other and they are not on the same page at all. And a big root is, do you think the brain is like a computer? Because those buckets are completely separate. Like people believe that the brain is like a computer, do not understand the people who do not think that way, and vice versa, right? And they just cannot have the same conversation.
That happens in my house because I can't have the same conversation as my mother.
Yeah, interesting.
Like we really understand consciousness differently.
It's a core problem.
It's a real core.
Well, and it's called like substrate independence.
Oh,
what?
It has a name, and that's the view that cognition or consciousness can be run, like it's sort of the software that can be run on, and it can be silicon, can be carbon, the physical substrate of whatever this is,
whatever consciousness
it does. And it's still a huge debate. The Ned Block at NYU is a big, he believes in there, and that the view that the brain is computational is called computationalism.
Right.
And so we don't have, we don't have like a good theory where if you're like, there's no soul, there's no supernatural stuff, there's just physics.
Right.
But what level, like, there's this whole thing about theory reduction, but like, does it all reduce to physics? But then people don't have a good story for, let's say there's just physics or this naturalistic theory. Like, we don't have a story that isn't computation still. You know what I mean? Like we don't have
a better
metaphor yet. Like in neuroscience too, like there's a whole field called computational neuroscience, which is all about what are the computations that allow us to be conscious or that maybe are consciousness. And if you can figure those out, there's no reason why you can't put those in a computer. Cause then there's this idea of multiple realizability where there's different ways of instantiating the same computation. That's so the idea for the book.
I was like, so many distractions. I love the book. So
the book was like, I feel like sort of LSD or stuff like LSD is an interesting, I don't know if it's a counterexample to like the mind is a computer, but it's like this molecule that just totally disrupts your serotonin system, blah, blah. And it totally alters your consciousness. Like it just, depending on how much you take.
I remember in the book,
in
the book, you described it as a perturbation.
Yeah.
Of your normal computation.
Yeah. And a computationist would be like, well, that's just clearly a computation too. We just have to figure out, exactly what the computations are that allows the LSD molecule to dock with the receptor and do all the stuff.
Right. They can almost model it as a statistical phenomenon.
Yeah. That's kind of, And the whole, what you would, have better, like, what is a computation? I don't even, there's a whole, it's like, it's information processing, or what's information? Information is computation. Like, it's, it's kind of a circular thing, but it's a serious, I would say it's the mainstream view, I think, in neuroscience and obviously in AI is that the brain is a computer. It literally is a computer. A certain type, like it's a,
Is that really a dominant?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I would, yeah.
Yeah.
So that we just need, or another way of saying, like, let me just give the benefit of the doubt to these folks and say that, like, it might not be a computer, but we're going to do our best to model it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
like in a
statistical.
Yeah.
And you find that with the AI consciousness proponents now is like, statistical approximation, if it's out to the 100th digit, it's it's indistinguishable from what we experience. Like, we don't experience reality at that level of resolution. If we can model something at that level of resolution,
that's good enough.
Yeah, it's good. And
like, it's funny because I just was talking to my therapist today about, like, my attachment theory problems. You know what I mean? Like, there's no space in that world for just, like, my fear of abandonment.
Right.
Some kind of, like, basic Freudian phenomenon.
Yeah, there's so much that doesn't fit in this.
Not to say that Freud was perfectly correct. I mean, I'm happy with competing models.
Yeah.
That, like, each of them contribute to some kind of collage of how we understand ourselves. But it strikes me that, like, this is particularly rigid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, it's a model, and I think that gets lost, right? Like, it's a metaphor. Like, it's a use. Not all metaphors have uses.
Yeah.
And that one's extremely useful because it's, like, dominating how we talk about things, right? Like the way, the words that we use in computing or for explaining ourselves, or like the pattern recognition is like, it's just, they just like fall, they bridge both worlds so much that it has to have some uses, right? For explaining stuff, but it's not the thing itself. It's just like a model.
Yeah. And you could argue, even atoms or like subatomic, those are, it's a model. Like, there might not be, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very good model, but we might, at some point science might be like, you know what, actually, there's no such thing as atoms.
Okay.
It's a different, it turns out it was a different thing.
Thank you for saying that. I've always felt that way. Especially when you're talking about, like, light is a wave, but it's also a particle. And I'm just like, does that mean we just don't have a good model?
Yes. I 100%. Like,
like, maybe we need a third thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess they invented, but, like, my point
I think data is a wave and a particle at the same time too.
But this is the debate about atoms are unobservable. We can only
exactly.
We can only observe their effect, or we can blow up stuff.
We can only model that.
But hear me out. Because data, we think of it as just fitting into a spreadsheet, little existing things, but that is not how we're collecting data anymore. It is being done live streaming. Constant.
Yeah.
It has also now the element of time introduced to it, which we didn't used to have, that social media companies are exploiting.
Right. It's got to flow.
It's changed. And so, now there is it's like light, there's a.
But I would still say that there's a human choice about what counts as data. Like, we have, not any, like, anything could be data, but there's certain things we go, this is data about this. And that requires some belief, it requires some theory beforehand before you can say, like, like, even if you have a sensor, you have to build the sensor because you think
it is a human created.
Yeah, data is very much created and not passively collected.
Wow, this feels like a conversation for a next podcast.
Sure.
But let me just
Has it been a half an hour already?
No, not quite yet. We've got a couple minutes.
Yeah.
I wanted you to talk briefly about your recent paper.
Yeah.
With Deb about AI safety.
Well, it's not recent anymore. It came out in 2020.
Okay. We'll talk about that.
But
it's more recent than the books.
Yes.
But it's not as recent as the books that you should have written.
Yeah. Which, a book could definitely be written about the paper stuff, but it's very similar to your work, both of your work in this. So of course we have these big AI systems now, and, like, there's this question of, like, accountability.
Yeah.
And I had come from, I had come to tech from working in aerospace and then working in pharmaceuticals, where they have decades of regulation and like these really, really complicated auditing they have processes.
And like mistakes meant people died.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
right.
Both of those situations. Right. I mean, I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah. And so, and then
mistakes in chatbot stuff means also that people die.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
So then Deb was working for me as a student researcher, and I think she was in her PhD program. Actually, she might. I don't remember. I have to ask.
Okay.
Follow up on this, but we were talking about this sort of she was a computer science student, and I had been coming from these industries, and we were talking about documentation.
Yeah.
And just the realization that like there's no documentation about these, and this was back before big chatbots and LLMs and stuff, but just normal
machine
classifiers. But even for those, like the documentation was just just about like what is this for? Where's the data from? Like, and then model cards and data. Like Tim had done data sheets, and Meg had done model cards, and we were kind of like, well, what if we put those together into a larger sort of end-to-end thing where there's nothing like conceptually interesting about the paper itself. It's just like, hey, there's these other industries that have decades of experience documenting giant technical systems. Maybe we could apply that to machine learning systems. And, people were like,
yeah, right. No, seriously, like, because why? Because the audacity of thinking in the Silicon Valley context that you could learn from the past, that you could learn from other people.
Yeah, learn from other industries. That
there's domain expertise to be.
Well, and this, like you're saying, this experience of catastrophes and accidents and disasters, which led to all these practices, because people started to understand, like nobody knew about metal fatigue as a scientific phenomenon before an airplane fell apart in midair in the 1960s. And they're like, what the hell? And they're like, oh, turns out after a few years, like metal starts to warp. And like, so then do you know what I mean? There's so many things in aviation and pharmaceuticals that we didn't understand scientifically before there was a big accident because, and that type of thing. So, but so the thinking was kind of like, maybe we can try to avoid some of that in this, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like you're saying, like learn from these experiences in other domains.
But for what it's worth, the metaphor I use, in my work is we need to build a cockpit.
Yeah.
A cockpit of, like, you wouldn't fly in a plane without a cockpit.
Yeah.
You shouldn't fly this AI without a cockpit. Because it's going to have a crash and people are going to die.
I mean, I think the problem, and then this we can get into, I don't know if you want to get into the AGI discussion, but it's kind of like, a plane is built for a specific person or purpose.
Yeah.
It's like, and a drug, it's like we developed, whatever this glaucoma drug to treat glaucoma. That's its intended purpose.
It's narrowly defined.
It's and it's easy to sort of audit against a narrowly defined purpose. But these are everything models, and they're supposed to be they're supposed to do everything. They're general.
Yeah,
it's 100% general.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
How do you evaluate? Yeah, exactly.
It's impossible about it.
Yeah. Kathy always I think one of the first things I learned working with you was that you really need to be specific, and everything's super context dependent.
Yeah,
super context dependent. Yeah.
So then, do you audit the how are these things?
Case by case.
Yeah, and that's
you just start at like people dying.
A case.
Yeah, and
it's not actually that complicated.
Which is in those other industries. Yeah, you're like, how do you prevent the plane from falling out of the sky? And you engineer backwards from that goal.
Yeah. Start with like, you're a hospital triage nurse. What do you do?
Yeah, the horrible thing you don't want to happen. Yeah. And then you have to prioritize, like the hazard, like, well, if the door flies off the plane, a lot of bad shit happens. So we're going to engineer the fuck out of it so the door can never fall off the plane. You know what I mean?
Versus like we run out of like the cheese and wine snacks, not so bad. Happened to me. I was in the last row and I was a little pissed, but I was like, you know what? This is not a tragedy, Kathy O'Neill. You can handle it. I just want to thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This was fun. Yeah, thanks.
Sherry, thank you for co-hosting with me.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And please join us next time for the AI Skeptics.
Just hold